I'm Teresa Carraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. There are times when I find something that fits so perfectly with what I've been thinking that I almost feel as if I brought it into being. I had that feeling when I first discovered A Course in Miracles. It fit everything that I had already been coming to in my own mind through my own process. And then suddenly there was this validation. Except that it still referred to all three parts of divinity as He. And that just seemed bizarre to me. Now, thanks to a commenter named Zara, to whom I will always be grateful, I have found the book that I feel like I've been looking for all my life. It's called When God Was a Woman, and it's written by Merlin Stone. And she gives evidence that that was true for 9,500 years. And it has been a mere 1,500 years since God's sex change operation was complete. And if we put in the evidence of Anno Domini by Laurent Guyenot, where he looks at the chronology of the first 1,000 years AD as being something that was made up and taken and put different dates sequentially rather than simultaneous as happening in different countries, that is possibly 700 years that have been fabricated. So it's entirely possible that it's only been 800 years since God has been a man. Let's look at the implications of that. It being Friday night, I needed to take myself out to dinner and over a delicious meal transcribe several quotes from When God Was a Woman, which I will be interspersing. Man enjoys the great advantage of having a God endorse the code he writes. And since man exercises a sovereign authority over women, it is especially fortunate that this authority has been vested in him by the Supreme Being. For the Jew, Mohammedans, and Christians, among others, man is master by divine right. The fear of God will therefore repress any impulse towards revolt in the downtrodden female. Simone de Beauvoir, The Second Sex, 1949. In the beginning, there was Isis, oldest of the old. She was the goddess from whom all becoming arose. She was the great lady, mistress of the two lands of Egypt, mistress of shelter, mistress of heaven, mistress of the house of life, mistress of the word of God. She was the unique. In all her great and wonderful works, she was a wiser magician and more excellent than any other god. Thebes, Egypt, 14th century BCE. Merlin Stone writes, "At the very dawn of religion, God was a woman." She continues, "I discovered accounts of sun goddesses in the lands of Canaan, Anatolia, Arabia, and Australia, while sun goddesses among the Eskimos, the Japanese, and the Khasis of India were accompanied by subordinate brothers who were symbolized as the moon. Most astonishing of all was the discovery of numerous accounts of the female creators of all existence, divinities who were credited with bringing forth not only the first people, but the entire earth and the heavens above. There were records of such goddesses in Sumer, Babylon, Egypt, Africa, Australia, and China. In India, the goddess Saravati was honored as the inventor of the original alphabet, while in Celtic Ireland, the goddess Bridget was esteemed as the patron deity of language. Texts revealed that it was the goddess Nabada in Sumer who was paid honor as the one who initially invented clay tablets and the art of writing. The official scribe of the Sumerian heaven was a woman. A quote in the book is that all theology is essentially political. And here is the full quote, which is from Sheila Collins. Theology is ultimately political. The way human communities deify the transcendent and determine the categories of good and evil have more to do with the power dynamics of the social systems which create the theologies than with the spontaneous revelation of truth from another quarter. And we're going to be looking at some of those political implications because it's different when we look at the world coming into being through the Creatrix. What is a maternal God, and what does that God want? I don't think goddess worship is really the point, because what mother wants to be worshipped by their children? You want your kids to get along and take care of each other. You don't want them to worship you. This is not the way that mothers are. So it changes the way in which societies were structured. 3 things we're going to look at is that when God was a woman, property ownership was matrilineal, and the movement between families was matrilocal. And then the ownership of children was seen as belonging with and to the mother. And third, the code of ethics, when God is a woman, is that sex is celebrated and violence is condemned. When God becomes a man, violence is celebrated and sex is condemned. So we could have been having 75 generations of celebratory sex rather than violence. That old hippie saying, make love not war, it made sense. Most pagan idols had breasts, Merlin states. The Torah glosses over the sexuality of the deity and turns the goddess into the word Elohim. But the Quran states, Allah will not tolerate idolatry. The pagans pray to females. Professor R.K. Harrison wrote of the goddess religion. One of its most prominent features was the lewd, depraved, orgiastic character of its cultic procedures. Professor W.F. Albright, one of the leading authorities on the archaeology of Palestine, wrote of the female religion as orgiastic nature worship, sensuous nudity, and gross mythology. He continued by saying that it was replaced by Israel with its pastoral simplicity and purity of life, its lofty monotheism, and its severe code of ethics. Merlin notes the use of word tricks. Cults and fertility cults refer to feminine. Religion refers to the masculine. Sexually active goddesses are virgin harlots, while male deities who rape or seduce women are playful and virile. The priestesses who follow holy sexual customs are ritual prostitutes. Females are deities, males are gods. Of Egypt, Dr. Murray suggested that women's condition was high, due perhaps to their economic independence. One of the earliest archaeologists of the pyramids of Egypt, Sir William Flanders Petrie, wrote in 1925 that in Egypt all property went in the female line. The woman was the mistress of the house, and in early tales she is represented as having entire control of herself and the place. Love poems discovered in Egyptian tombs strongly hint that it was the Egyptian women who did the courting, ofttimes wooing the male by plying him with intoxicants to weaken his protestations. At the level of royalty, the Egyptian culture was most periods matrilineal. Let's start with property being matrilineal from 9000 BCE. What this means is that it passed from mother to daughter, and that when a man were to marry, he would go to the woman's house. He would go to her clan and become part of that community. It meant that children were surrounded by aunts and grandmothers and grandfathers and uncles, that they always had a community of people to whom they belonged. They were never leaving their home and going somewhere else, where often the woman in a patrilineal society becomes the servant to the mother-in-law. In this case, the mother is always in control of her own life and isn't dependent on anyone else in order to raise her children with security. Robertson Smith on the Goddess in Arabia and the Ages of Mother Kinship. The change in the law of kinship deprived the mother of her old preeminence in the family and transferred to the father the greater part of her authority and dignity. Women lost the right to choose their own partners at will. The wife became subject to her husband's lordship. At the same time, her children became, for all purposes of inheritance and all duties of blood, members of his and not her kin. So far as the religion kept pace with the new laws of social morality due to this development, the independent divine mother necessarily became the subordinate partner of a male deity. Or if the supremacy of the goddess was too well established to be thus undermined, she might change her sex, as in southern Arabia, where Ishtar was transformed into the masculine Athtar. And was the Egyptian goddess Auset, also known as Isis, transformed into the sociopathic god Set, also known as Yahweh. Now let's look at the child belonging to and with the mother. As you know, I think the Bible is a mixture of truth and lies. Something that I think is truth is what God has joined together, let no man tear asunder. The lie is that means marriage, which is not God that has joined the man and woman. It is some priest or whoever is usurping the power of God. What God the Creatrix has joined together is certainly the mother and the baby. As we know, babies know their mother by smell. From the time that they're born, they can pick out their mother. And to take a baby or an infant or a child away from the mother, I believe, is always child abuse, that it is always traumatic. It is something the baby doesn't understand. So unless there is death or some other very compelling reason, I do not believe that a child should ever be taken away from the mother for something like circumcision, for instance, or for surrogate mothers, which is a very bizarre thing. How can we have mothers having babies for hire, giving up the most precious thing that they will ever have? And I am not saying that those men wouldn't be good parents, but they will never be a mother. And adoption, again, I think tears away the mother. But when we look at custody battles, and I've shown where the FBI has international manhunts for women who have taken their babies in order to be with their families and raise them, and they're seen as international criminals for doing that because a man's precious sperm is supposed to make him have a claim. Now, come on, men waste sperm all the time. We all know about this. There is nothing that makes that man's sperm give a right of ownership. And what kind of man only wants a baby that carries on his lineage, that would not love a baby unless it was his? That goes so far against any concept of love. That is property. So I think we need to go back to this concept that a baby belongs to and with the mother, and that men need to, I think, get over that insecurity that if women didn't need them, they wouldn't want them. I think that's creating that reality. But for a man to be a good dad is something that's so precious that I don't see that being something that would be an obstacle if we had a sensible, realistic society that gave security to the woman. Merlin writes, "The mother would have been seen as the singular parent of her family, the lone producer of the next generation. For this reason, it would be natural for children to take the name of their mother's tribe or clan. Accounts of descent in the family would be kept through the female line, going from mother to daughter rather than from father to son, as is the custom practiced in Western societies today. Such a social structure is generally referred to as matrilineal, that is, based upon mother kinship. Not only the names, but titles, possessions, and territorial rights are passed along through the female line, so that they may be retained within the family clan. In addition, marriages were matrilocal, where the husband moved to the wife's family home or village, and agriculture is attributed to the goddess. C. Dawson, writing in 1928, surmised that the earliest agriculture must have grown up around the shrines of the mother goddess, which became social and economic centers, as well as holy places, and were the germs of future cities. W. Schmidt, quoted by Joseph Campbell in Primitive Mythology, says of these early cultures, "Here it was the women who showed themselves supreme. They were not only the bearers of children, but also the chief producers of food. By realizing that it was possible to cultivate as well as to gather, they had made the earth valuable, and they became, consequently, its possessors. Thus they won both economic and social power and prestige." And then Merlin looks at how this all changed with the northern invaders. Their arrival was not a gradual assimilation, as the goddess's people seems to have been, but rather a series of aggressive invasions, resulting in the conquest area by area of the goddess peoples. These northern invaders, generally known as Indo-Europeans, brought their own religion with them, the worship of a young warrior god and or a supreme father god. Their arrival is archaeologically and historically attested by 2400 BCE, but several invasions may have occurred even earlier. As the invaders gained more territories and continued to grow more powerful over the next 2,000 years, this synthesized religion often juxtaposed the female and male deities not as equals, but with the male as the dominant husband or even as her murderer. How did this change happen? According to Merlin Stone, the transition was actually accomplished by violent aggression, brutal massacres, and territorial conquest throughout the Near and Middle East. And so around 2400 before Common Era was when the northern invasions came, and these were Indo-European. Often they say that it was involving a people who were led by Indo-Europeans, that the people were not necessarily of that same class, And it was finding nomadic men, shepherds. These shepherds come up again and again, where they are the army, they're the invaders, the ones who pretend to be pastoral, but really are bringing this infiltration of patriarchy, and then conquering and putting under siege these cities and having them give up their goddesses and instead putting in the male deity. Now, this starts in Egypt at around 3000 BCE, and then they talk about how Crete, which is another very famous goddess culture in which women have tremendous freedom. But around 1400 BCE, they start invading there. And they say that this may have been the Hyksos or the Hekakasut, because that's about the same time that they get driven out of Egypt. This ties everything together. They also talk about the Hebrew. And so again, we have our Habaru, those who were the terrorists and who put these cities under siege, that in the Hebrew code, the woman was less than a slave. She needed to call her husband Lord, Master, Baal, Baal. Isn't that interesting? And so we have these different goddesses that become something that is usurped and becomes a male god. That we have El, for instance, who is Elohim, which is female, and that appears in the Bible. So in the Bible and through this Hebrew culture, it makes women into something that is less than a slave. Merlin Stone writes, accounts of the antagonistic attitudes of Judaism, Christianity, and Mohammedanism, Islam, toward the sacred artifacts of the religions that preceded them, revealed that this was so, especially in the case of the goddess worshipped in Canaan, Palestine, which was Ashtoreth or Astarte. The bloody massacres, the demolition of statues called pagan idols, and sanctuaries are recorded in the pages of the Bible following this command by Yahweh. You must completely destroy all the places where the nations you dispossess have served their gods, on high mountains, on hills, under any spreading tree. You must tear down their altars, smash the pillars, cut down their sacred poles, set fire to the carved images of their gods, and wipe out their name from that place. Deuteronomy 12, 2-3. And then good and evil is conflated with light and dark, because you have these lighter-skinned Indo-Europeans who are coming down and ruling over those with darker skin. And so having a caste system is important, because you need to have your warrior caste who is protecting the purity of not having intermixing. I was just talking about the Bhagavad Gita, and here it was in this book saying, here's what happened. This is part of this culture, and the Vedas and Sanskrit were all part of this patriarchal invasion. It wasn't like that before. It also goes through how the woman, the goddess, was represented by the serpent, by the snake, and look at all those myths in which men are battling the serpent, or Eve is seduced by the snake. These are all ways in which the myths have been turned into something where the men are dominating the women and erasing them by turning them into dragons, which was another representation of the woman, and then vanquishing them. I'll read the titles of subheadings, which are quotes from source documents. Ethiopia and Libya, all authority was vested in the woman. Egypt, while the husbands stay home and weave. Sumer, the women of former days used to take 2 husbands. Elam, naked before the high priestess. Babylon, to hold and manage their own estates. Anatolia, from old they have been ruled by women. Crete, dominated by the female principle. And Greece, the attack upon the matrilineal clans. On the conquest of Greece and Crete by the Masonans, there's an interesting quote. There has even been the suggestion that the Masonans were related to the Hixos, the shepherd kings who used horse-drawn war chariots and had previously held Egypt under their rule for several centuries. The Hixos were driven out of Egypt at much the same time as the Masonans first appeared. This book will be informing me for the rest of my life because we women are not asking too much when we want to prioritize children and raise them in security without needing to serve the market, without being threatened by having them taken from us. We need to change the way in which we design property so that it serves the family, and the heart of the family is the mother. I'll be continuing on this theme, and at thirdparadigm.substack.com, I'll have full quotes from Merlin Stone's excellent book and also great AI art from Amy Rosebush that goes right with this. In the meantime, here's an early one on the Divine Feminine, which is Jordan Peterson getting it wrong, and here is the playlist on Where Are the Women? Thank you for watching.